Well, ladies and gentlemen, only really two news stories to talk about today. Let's get on to the first one. This is actually the budget that never was. This is apparently the story that the SARS Commissioner, Edward, basically raised complaints around the potential for a VAT increase to actually boost revenue in the country. According to him, in 2018, a VAT increase then failed to materialize the tax increases that everybody thought the country needed. The news actually came out because Godongwana, after the actual press conference, his mic was still on. He basically said a hot mic. And he expressed anger behind the scenes at the SARS Commissioner for basically sabotaging his budget. Now, according to Godongwana, the SARS Commissioner had actually originally been on board with the collection plan, and now at the last minute, he had sidelined him and embarrassed him before the nation. It's very interesting because, according to the politicians, they're all claiming this as a victory, even though, according to the news today, stocks and bonds have crashed, and the rand is doing absolutely appalling. They see this happens every time a nation fails to pass a budget. When you have any form of political discord that shows forms of political instability, the investors generally tend to react negatively to the nation with that instability. It doesn't matter if it's the United Kingdom, whether it's South Africa or America. We've seen this numerous times that the response to these forms of political instabilities is investor sell-offs. Investors lose confidence and they leave. So regardless of who claims victory for the delayed budget, it's actually been rather negative economically. In any case, let's get on to the main news story of today. But before we do, can I yet again remind you, don't forget to hit the bell icon and subscribe to the channel. So let's actually talk about it. What is in the news today? Actually, it's the news that potentially Donald Trump was right about South Africa's redistribution program, in other words, expropriation without compensation. And this comes on the back of a press release done by the Freedom Front Plus. Now, I must admit, I've attempted to fact-check the hell out of this, but it's actually proving really difficult because outside of the Freedom Front Plus talking about the potential plans of the government, can't actually find any. Now, obviously, the Freedom Front Plus does sit on certain parliamentary portfolio committees, so they do have a better understanding as to what's happening behind closed doors. And so what this may be a prelude to is the government's intentions, as opposed to what is currently happening or a bill even being proposed to the public. So what exactly are we talking about specifically? Well, this apparently relates to a proposed bill that's being pushed forward by the Department of Land, Reform and Rural Development. The actual minister in charge of that department actually comes from the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. They are not a DA, Freedom Front Plus, ANC, EFF, or whatever else minister. They are a PAC minister. So the bill actually being proposed is called the Equitable Access to Land Bill. And apparently is due to be launched later this year. And what the bill intends to do is to bring land ownership in line with the country's demographics using race as a basis. Now, the reason that this entire act becomes important is because we are frequently reminded of the theft of land that occurred during the apartheid government's occupation of South Africa, specifically in the form of the Native Lands Act and the Group Areas Act of 1950. Those two forms of legislation are the main pieces of legislation blamed for the demographic issues that we currently see in land ownership today, as both basically use race as a precursor for land ownership. So why is this bill, the Equitable Access to Land Bill, important? Well, some fear that the actual act itself may be used to racially profile land ownership in the same way that the Group Areas Act and the Native Lands Act did. The suggested outcome of the Equitable Access to Land Bill is basically to reskew the pattern of land ownership in the future. Now, there are already pushes that were put in place with acts of parliament that forced land registration to now include the actual race of the individual registering the land. Many at the time noticed this and the push to get conveyances to do it and commented that this data was not for no good reason. It would be used in the future to justify something more nefarious. And some are now suggesting that we know what that is. So everybody appears to be a bit more worried about what land ownership will look like in the future, given the expropriation without compensation bill. Now, that bill, we have frequently been told, is to reshape the skewed ownership patterns of South Africa's land. So I want to ask a question. How exactly are you going to use the Equitable Access to Land bill to reshape land ownership in South Africa? Are you going to use state land and provide title to others in order to get more land owners? Or is the intention to expropriate white people's land in order to redistribute it to others so that you can say, well, the ownership patterns, the land ownership patterns, have been realigned? Some individuals are incredibly worried about what this actually means to, one, white land ownership, specifically whether or not they will be targeted directly for land redistribution, and two, what it actually means to property rights and the struggle for freedom, which is obviously the idea of 1994. So why exactly are we talking about the 1994 date specifically? And that actually is in relation to the initial agreement that the ANC government did with the Nats in order to end the apartheid. And according to the Freedom Front Plus, this bill could mark the end of that agreement, with the ANC government basically violating the terms of that agreement in order to satisfy an ideological bend, which they can then use in the future to basically rebuff any of the MK party's challenges to the way that it governs. So what do you think? Is this the start of equitable land redistribution that aligns with EWC? Is this everything that Donald Trump warned, expropriating white people's land to give it through to black individuals? Everything the ANC government denies it intends to do. And yet it does appear in the first instance like they are laying the foundations and the legislative framework in order for them to be able to push through that ideological bend. Very difficult to say what's actually going to happen. And I think that the fact that the Freedom Front Plus have highlighted this bill this far in advance means that the bill, according to the balance of forces, is unlikely to ever actually see the light of day. It is unlikely that this bill will actually be passed. But you see, if Freedom Front Plus hadn't promoted what was the intention of the portfolio committee to push forward, how far would the bill have got? And does this attempted bill actually show what the underlying motives of the ANC are? Very difficult to say at this point in time, but you can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, bye.